Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ailís Daly. I am the head of Trust and Safety in EMEA for Web Purify. We are a content moderation service provider. We also specialize in trust and safety and have been doing so for over 17 years. We partner with a wide range of clients and we tailor our services to their needs. We provide AI-powered moderation, human review, and also we have content moderation tooling that suits their needs also, depending on what those are. We also provide a trust and safety consultancy service, and that ranges from providing risk audits, from actually building trust and safety operating models from scratch, right up to crisis management. Before joining Web Purify, I led a global policy team for TikTok, focusing on very critical issues related to hate speech, violent extremism, harassment, and all kinds of abuse. Prior to TikTok, I led the community policy team for Airbnb in EMEA. And before that, I spent a number of years at Twitter and at Google. Before that, again, now I'm really going into the archives. I'm a dinosaur, by the way. I was a barrister in the Irish courts. Now, I'll be moderating today's panel discussion on the ROI of Trust and Safety. And we're going to be exploring how trust and safety leaders can ensure that their organization understand the criticality of investment in the space. Also the impact of regulation on the sector and how to position our work, not just as morally or legally necessary, but really an imperative for revenue and for a durable business. When I share my own experience in trust and safety, you know that I'm showing my age, so it's always a treat to be in great company. Apologies, lads, for outing your years of experience. I'm joined by two absolute seasoned pros from the tech industry. I think together we've probably seen it all, and we're really excited to dive into this topic today. Hopefully we'll provide you with a blend of insights, share some battle scars, and a lot of shared, I suppose, passion, most importantly, for keeping both the online and the real world spaces safe. Joining us first is Patrick Lawler, who is the head of safety policy for the public policy team at Bolt. It's the first European mobility super app. And Patrick is responsible for driving positive regulatory change in the safety space across all of Bolt's products. That includes rides, car sharing, and micromobility. He also has extensive experience in building trust and safety functions to scale, having spent over 6 years, yes, I said 6, which, you know, in tech years, like dog years, so it equates to what, 40? 6 years in Uber in Australia. Next, we have Owen O'Reilly, who is the Director of Enterprise Risk at the global marketplace, and my personal favorite, Etsy. Owen is responsible for developing and overseeing Etsy's risk management framework. He's also the Chief Risk Officer for Etsy's EEA payment subsidiary, Etsy Payments. And prior to joining Etsy, Owen held a number of very senior roles in Deloitte and KPMG, advising clients on forensic risk and regulatory compliance matters. So he's held very senior roles, also in compliance and financial crime in the banking sector. Now, Owen has been working alongside trust and safety teams for years, really. And I think we're going to learn a lot from him in terms of how he convinces the business to invest in, shall we call it, the less glam, but really important risk management strategies. So shall we dive in? Maybe we'll just go into the overarching trend in trust and safety as a revenue imperative. Owen, what have you been seeing over the last 5 years? How have companies been strategically thinking about trust and safety?
Thanks, Ailís. So firstly, I'd say I think risk management is glamorous, but maybe that's just me.
Regulation nerd.
Yeah. So firstly, I'll preface my responses, but just to build on what you said, Ailís, that while I don't work directly in trust and safety, that's my get out of jail card, by the way. In case
you're an ally.
I certainly would see myself as an ally. Like my role is to really elevate the key risks across the entire business. That includes trust and safety and making sure that they're, I guess, positioned very well from a risk and strategic perspective. I will say, I'm in awe of trust and safety teams. So just the sheer volume,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just the volume and depth of detail that you go through is pretty mind-boggling. So I'm a fan, so you definitely don't need to convince me. So I guess just to answer your question directly, I mean, certainly from my time in Etsy, the last 3.5 years or so, trust and safety has been a function that we've consistently leaned on. I think in terms of the growth of trust and safety in general across the industry over the last number of years, I think that makes sense. And my view is there's likely a number of push-pull factors at play there in terms of the prioritization. So maybe just to start with one of the more obvious ones, and I think it's been mentioned in some other forums, like that threat landscape. I mean, we all know it's growing, like that. The advancement of AI and technology. It just means those threats, they're not always even new threats, but they're coming in a different way, they're coming at a different scale, they're coming at a different velocity, and obviously trust and safety teams need to be ready for that, and that's obviously going to drive, and already is driving, elements of prioritization. Regulation, you mentioned, I won't go into it in too much detail, but I think we'll see more of that maybe in the future in terms of prioritization. But maybe, I guess, just putting my ERM hat on for a minute. I think I would look at this also from a brand and strategic perspective. I mean, if you think about over the last number of years, there's been an explosion of platform-based business models, of marketplaces. It's a very competitive market. Eyes are always on companies, like 24/7 with social media, etc. And understandably, companies place a lot of emphasis on cultivating a brand. I mean, at the end of the day, it's you're trying to make sure you've got a brand that can trust, but I think more importantly, a brand that stays trusted. And I guess in the complex world that we're living in, to me, trust and safety is such an important part of cultivating, protecting that brand. And to me, that's why it makes sense that trust and safety are moving, I guess, more and more into that kind of strategic picture alongside, let's say, the more revenue generating parts of the business. And I would expect that to continue into the future for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And Patrick, have you noticed a change in how TNS is valued? Any moments that you'd like to share with us on when you saw that shift in attitude?
Yeah, I think companies in the tech space have become more and more receptive as they get caught out for self-regulating themselves. Regulators expect more and customers expect more. It's kind of like you wouldn't sell a car without a seatbelt these days. One day you could. As soon as the regulation came in, it seemed like common sense. So companies around the tech sector are trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of regulation, and the only way to do that is by building up a strong and effective trust and safety function. One of the biggest mistakes I see companies making is losing trust with the public and the regulator really early, and then they either overcorrect or they get these onerous regulations put upon them. Now, when they get these onerous regulations put upon a company, as the company scales, these regulations become more and more expensive to adhere to, where they'd only just kind of bite the bullet in the first instance and regulate themselves in the right way to do it. They would find that they're able to scale more efficiently without large costs.
Yeah, early investment seems to be key. It's still on the theme of value. I suppose I've spent the last, over 10 years now, running alongside the business as they're creating new products and new features and all really exciting, innovative things, and really being the person shouting alongside, being like, can we just pause down? Can we pause now? Calm down. Can we just think about this a little bit more? And really being seen as the fun police. Let's be honest. Companies can sometimes safeguard, or I suppose compromise those safeguards and sacrifice them with this desire for innovation, for growth. What has been your experience? I'll start with you, Patrick, on getting the business to pause and take notice. What's your running alongside them experience?
Yeah, this may sound like super simple, but I really think the idea of telling a compelling story and a narrative is really important in the trust and safety space. I think as humans, we're kind of biased to sensationalism. I can almost see, as you allude to, when I get on a call, no one wants to listen to my presentation. You can see the collective kind of sigh or the pre-yawns as I unmute my microphone. But it is really compelling if you can bring these stories to specific incidents. Now, I remember a time in a previous company when, in a more junior role, I was yelling and screaming about a specific safety incident that was affecting our customers. I wasn't getting any traction. It was only until I came in one morning and someone within the company themselves had been a victim of this very specific safety incident, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that spread through the company like wildfire, and I was able to say, yes, that happens. It not only happens to X person who's our employee, it happens to thousands of our users. This is the data to back it up, and we need to invest in product now. And I've basically taken that approach throughout my career. So building a comprehensive narrative around a specific person, a specific story, tying that to data, and then pushing for further investment in the trust and safety space due to that. If you can grab people's attention in that way, the story sticks and they're more likely to act, in my opinion.
Yeah, I certainly have had that where nothing like the CEO's friends to get impacted before you get suddenly a resource investment. Owen, what about yourself? Can you share any stories of losing out against growth and what lessons were learned there?
Yeah, no, I'll probably say some similar things to Patrick in a way. I mean, again, I don't think this is a challenge unique to trust and safety. Again, I'm coming before, I'd say I've come from a world of financial services, which is kind of more heavily regulated, for example, and there's always been that natural tension between, let's say, compliance and risk and maybe the more business-leaning side. Of course, on the tech side, there's really that hyper desire for growth and to deliver that through speed and innovation. So in terms of how do you get the trust and safety kind of voice at the table? It can be hard, and I think probably my experience or examples of best practice are as much coloured by my experience of maybe what not to do, based on kind of earlier in my career, and I'll probably lean on a little bit of what Patrick said there. I mean, certainly. I can certainly recall earlier in my career times when I've been armed with all the technical knowledge. I know something inside out, and I can think about all the different reasons why it can't be done a certain way. And in a way, you're engaged at a particular moment, which probably isn't ideal. But the reality is that just doesn't work. And I actually love the idea of Patrick's, the storytelling piece, because at the end of the day, you do have to kind of connect with your audience, etc. And the reality is, if you do come at it one-sided, you're probably not going to get traction, and that's the first time around, right? They're less likely to come to you the next time as well, and you're not going to be brought in early, and that's really where you can add value. So, to me, it's very much about leaning in. We all work for the same company at the end of the day. We all want the same thing. We all want growth. It's about how do we actually define the problem statement that we want to start with, and that should include trust and safety. And so, some messages that I certainly carry with me now, would be, firstly, thinking back about strategy. At the end of the day, strategy is about choosing good options from the many options. There's a lot of options out there, and really you risk undermining that growth if you choose the wrong path. And having trust and safety at the table early can actually help unlock, let's say, the likes of product teams choose the right path. And I think that can actually drive innovation. Of course, speed is important. Again, that's why I'd argue trust and safety should be at the table early.
Mm-hmm. I want to delve into that a little bit, actually, because is there a way that a company can measure the impact of trust and safety efforts on its revenue? People love this, don't they? Are there specific metrics there that we can pull on to convince or track in order to present those? Go on, Owen. Is there a secret metrics? Tell us all.
I wish there was a secret metric for this one. So I think that it's difficult to directly measure the impact of trust and safety. Again, we're kind of in the counterfactual world. Well, what if this happens? You know what I mean? And it's difficult to say, well, we saved this much money because something didn't happen. That said, I'm not convinced that measuring the success of strategy, the execution of strategy, is purely a revenue-based metric. I think there's a lot more that needs to be looked at there. And I suppose my view of this is that you can build trust and safety specific metrics, and ideally, if you can link them to your brand perception. Even if you're thinking about surveys, how's your brand perceived from a safety perspective in the eyes of customers? And if you see an uptick in that, and that's linked to your trust and safety measures, over time you'll see potentially a positive correlation with growth. And when you actually start seeing correlative KPIs, let's say, alongside the revenue ones, that can be a very powerful thing. And I think that's something that I would suggest is a way to do it.
That's brilliant. I love that. How about yourself, Patrick? Would you agree with Owen that, what he said about the power of storytelling and, I suppose, using other avenues to present your case? I'm back into my legal days.
Yeah. I definitely agree on that. I think when it comes to measuring the impact of trust and safety on revenue, it's easier to do a post-mortem. So it's easier to do a deep dive or a root cause analysis on something that has happened. What's harder is to do it in real time. When you look at trust and safety incidents, in my opinion, those root cause analysis are like the tip of the iceberg, and they don't actually explain all the costs around it, from churn of customers to losing faith with regulators to ongoing regulations that are leaped upon your business. If you start measuring your trust and safety metrics early, and these could be things like costs of solving support tickets or incidents related with trust and safety for the customer support teams or legal teams, the churn of your customers related to trust and safety, and the cost of scaling onerous regulations. If you do that early, when something bad does happen, you can be like, we have a wealth of data to actually use and make a pinpointed solution for this problem. Because the mistake I see most companies making is they do this knee-jerk reaction, and then they basically put all these rules on all their customers who don't deserve it, when they could have just targeted the specific customers if they had the right safeguards and data in place. So we're in the tech space, data is everything, and you need to measure these safety incidents from the start.
Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, no, one of the lessons I certainly learned was never wasting the fire drill, especially when the fire drill was going off in another company, and using that to kind of present a moment where a CEO had to apologize to its entire community on the basis of something where they had fallen short, and being able to go to your executive leadership and say, do you see yourself in this person's shoes? Would you like to avoid it? And kind of using that. Still on the theme, I suppose, of creating value or savings, let's explore content moderation for a moment. Yeah, you know me, I can't really have a conversation these days without mentioning content moderation. So companies can sometimes hesitate to increase costs by bringing on a vendor partner. To do their content moderation or other services. What's been your experience there? Patrick, I'll start with yourself. Is it a good investment?
Yes, 100%. I think that companies may hesitate in that space, but then they'll pay a big consulting firm millions of dollars to do something that they're not experts in. When you bring an external content moderation company into the business, they're bringing in a very unique set of skills that, because tech is relatively new, a lot of people aren't privy to. They're also working with other clients at the same time, so they're able to bounce ideas off the other clients to fit your unique use case, and that's invaluable because you might spend a lot of money hiring one person, or you might go to one of the big 4 consulting firms, and they actually don't have anyone who's ever worked in those spaces. They've just hired people straight out of university with flashy degrees, so yes.
Imagine a company that had the content moderation services and over a decade of trust and safety experience. That could be valuable. Owen, you're an ex-consultant. Yeah, do you often find yourself convincing folks of the power of outsourcing?
Yes. So my short answer is yes as well. I've come from the likes of Deloitte and KPMGs, but again, kind of from a consumer perspective, and I work in, let's say, payments as well, and that kind of regulatory side, I really value niche, actually, for the exact reason that Patrick has suggested. So yeah, look, I'm probably biased in saying yes there, but I do think the mix and the type really does depend, obviously, on kind of where customers at in their overall journey and in terms of their own capabilities. But I suppose the other kind of thing I would temper with as well is I do think you can't outsource everything. You do need to retain some expertise in house. Ultimately, you can't outsource accountability for things that go wrong. You can't blame a third party. So I think having an expertise can be useful. But that said, I mean, obviously you have the potential to unlock new technology, new capabilities. People, even to flex volumes and queues. I think that could be so useful. And again, even think about your strategic journey. Like even from a shorter term, you might get to think there's so much to learn, and like you might have a longer term vision to actually build aspects of that and actually just keep other parts. So maybe one last point to say on it, like it costs money, right, to get people in, but at the same time, that can also unlock efficiencies for you. So like it can actually save you money as well. And like I think, you know, that's an important thing that shouldn't be lost as well in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Onto a little bit pivoting over to regulation. Nothing like a big fine in order to get folks to sit up and take notice. I think, you know, regulation has presented some opportunities, shall we say. Can I ask you first, Owen, how is the regulatory landscape going to change the game in terms of how companies are prioritising this work? Can you share maybe your experience of the impact of regulation on the business and its decisions?
Yeah. So it's a big space at the moment. Like like we all know, there's that influx of regulations at a European level, at the domestic level, and they're all overlapping. I think that's one of the challenges, and on top of that, it's not one regulator that's got this, you know, so we're actually dealing with multiple regulators. And like even to give an Irish perspective, like our Irish digital regulators, they've acknowledged that it's going to be a noisy regulatory pitch for a while, and there's a lot for firms to grapple with. Like in terms of like changing business decisions, I think there's more road to run in terms of the new wave of regulation in a way. Like I think, like our Irish regulators certainly have said, like, you know, what they want to see is kind of behavioural, that cultural change, and I think that's come up in some other sessions today as well. But we have seen it before in other areas, so like absolutely, I've seen it drive business change. Let's say in the likes of financial services, of course. But even if you think about data protection, which is like privacy by design, like that's well known now at this stage. And even when you think about that in the intersection of AI today, that's certainly driving business changes. And I would expect something similar to happen in the, let's say, the trust and safety space, trust by design. I think, you know, that's certainly coming.
Okay. Patrick, is this how you feel as well?
Yes, depending on the country. So like Bolt is now in 45 countries, which I work around. And I honestly think that outside of industries such as like financial regulation, which are really well regulated, some governments are generally not equipped to properly regulate certain industries, if I'm being completely honest, in a meaningful way. They just don't have the resources or data. And as we see like political landscapes changing across Europe and recently in America, we may see these departments further defunded. And so it's up to a lot of companies to do the right thing and set up their own internal governments. Now, like customers are generally quite trusting of industry until something that goes wrong. You know, like as an anecdote, you would be really surprised to see, like in the ride-sharing industry, how many customers are willing to share quite sensitive information with us that they're actually not willing to share with the government or the police. So it's really up to us to do the right thing, and things can go wrong fast. But just because those regulators, you know, aren't equipped doesn't mean they won't come knocking when a huge incident blows up, and then they will come and crack down on your company, pushing new regulations quickly under public pressure without the partnership of the private industry. And you really, as any company, really doesn't want that to happen. So it's important to stay ahead of the grind. Bolt does that a lot in terms of the safety products that they put out in markets that go above and beyond regulations. And I think every company should be pushing to do the same.
So that creation of a trust and safety culture seems to be really important, as does maybe that stakeholder engagement. I recall myself many years ago when I was working in Twitter in the ad policy enforcement space. I worked a lot with the sales teams. And I remember once a very excited and enthusiastic salesperson had gotten a very warm lead that they were thrilled about. A Russian dating site family who wanted to spend more than 10 million on advertising on the platform. And, you know, it didn't take a trust and safety genius to have a very quick eyeball on this so-called business and say, yeah, this is just a front for human trafficking, you know? And like you're breaking someone's heart in that moment because you can see the dollar signs in their eyes. But ultimately, it's not just being about being, you know, computer says no, get out of my space. It's about making sure that you are opening up the conversation with that team so that they, you know, really deep diving into the theme of human exploitation, how it manifests and what the real world harms is, so that they understand that they're actually really part now of protection measures. So, you know, how do you see trust and safety teams effectively communicate the significance of their work to, let's say, customer-facing teams like sales or other teams whose priorities aren't the same? What strategies, Owen, have you used to change hearts and minds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, I think the reality is probably different, but I mean, ideally, priorities needs wouldn't be different. So we've got different skill sets, if you know what I mean. But I mean, having good strategy, everybody should ideally be pointing in the same direction. I mean, it is a question of culture at the end of the day. I'll be honest, I would start kind of nearly not with the sales teams, but even at the leadership level. I mean, I think it's so important, that kind of tone for the top and making sure that message is kind of being delivered. Maybe just from a practical perspective. So, I think this is a concept of risk appetite, and actually having conversations. What is your risk appetite, and actually how do you measure your risk appetite, and how do you come up with it, and what are the inputs into that? That can actually be a very powerful tool, because you'll be coming to the table with a very objective point of view that's been probably it comes down from the top again, and I think that can be useful when you're having those discussions. But maybe just one other point around how do you actually win hearts and minds? So, I mean, you can also don't underestimate what people don't know as well, and just having information sessions and roadshows and all those things. I mean, at the end of the day, they're non-transactional. It kind of creates a safe space where people can ask the whys, and there's nothing behind it. And it means that when you actually do get to those situations where you're engaged in a particular thing, there's better understanding, there's a rapport built up, and actually just spending the time with people in a non-transactional way can be an effective way of actually making sure teams are closer, working the same goals, understand each other's point of view, etc.
Great, thanks. And Patrick, going back to the ranch, what advice have you got to these folks in terms of creating that culture of trust and safety across the entire business?
Yeah, I mean, one of the toughest things to do is change management in any field. I think trust and safety is even harder. As you said, I know there's people in my current company and previous companies who almost roll their eyes when they see me join the call. And there's not a silver bullet, but you have to take, in my opinion, a customized approach for each team. When speaking to marketing, I speak differently when I speak to operations or when I speak to sales, and I always try to tie trust and safety back to their main KPIs. You do this, going back to my original answer, by effective storytelling, by tying it to their KPIs, by using data. Customer research and speaking to your customers is really also important. Some of our best ideas in trust and safety come directly from our drivers. And at the end of the day, I think everyone should be generally proud to work in trust and safety. It's adding human and moral value to corporations. And I think as long as you tell the story the right way, you can influence change in your own companies.
Thanks so much. I think we've learned a lot in that discussion. We have had some practical takeaways here around the need to be integrated with your business and understand probably the pressures of your stakeholders, be that the sales team or wherever, in order to build trust both within and also elevate your mission. We've also kind of talked about not wasting the fire drill around regulation to build trust and safety resources, and that communicating the importance of trust and safety efforts, not just externally, but internally also seems to be vital to elevate, the status and attract investment. I really want to thank Owen and Patrick for joining the discussion today. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation or perhaps wants to pivot to discuss matters related to content moderation, policy development, regulation, please just grab us afterwards or grab us for a coffee. We'll be here for the next couple of days. Or indeed, you can find us also on LinkedIn.